in support of Ukraine. In support of Ukraine and its unions. Ukraine Solidarity Campaign supporters include national trade unions such as Unison, UCU, ASLEF, NUM, and PSS. We are also supported by Ukraine Solidarity and Information Group based in Canada, and Marian Abbs from Canada will say a few words about this initiative at the end of this meeting. Tonight's meeting is to consider elections in Europe and the USA and what this election results might mean for support of Ukraine. We are going to have three panelists tonight. Zofia Malisz of Lewica, Razem, Poland. Zofia is a member of Presidium of the National Council of the Razem party in Poland. She was recently a candidate for European Parliament. Zofia has been a prominent voice in solidarity with Ukraine across Europe. Vadim Kamenka, a journalist with the International Department of French newspaper Le Humanité and a part of CGT Trade Union Center in France. Vadim has been in Ukraine several times and attended the conference of KVPU, Confederation of Free Trade Unions of Ukraine. Tanya Vyhovsky is of Ukrainian heritage. She is a state senator in Vermont and was previously in the House of Representatives. She represents the Vermont Progressive Party and is allied with the Democrats. Tanya is part of the State Employees Union and as a senator is an active voice of Ukraine solidarity and with the labor movement. Each of the panelists will have 10 minutes to speak about the situation in their own country, and then we will have a Q&A afterwards. We're going to start with Zofia.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thanks, Ukraine Solidarity Campaign and Vsesvit for the invitation. I can see in the, I have been introduced to the panelists today when we have a very broad participation all around the world. Also, I recognize at least a couple of attendees from the European Ukraine Solidarity Network, which is a European continent, on the other hand, based affair that we have set up several years ago. So I'm really happy that to see you all again and to meet also several new people from across the pond. And I'm really excited to hear more about your activities regarding regarding solidarity with Ukraine and the situation in North America primarily, which is very relevant for all of us, I think, both in Ukraine and in Poland and in Europe in general. So I wanted to start with this meeting with perhaps recapping and offering a couple of reflections upon the possible consequences of the European Parliament election on Ukraine solidarity efforts and support in Europe. Speculate a little bit, speculate only because the election happened on the 9th of June. So we do have the results, but it is still quite hard to say anything definite about, for example, what the parliamentary groupings will look like. We are right now at the stage when there are also unofficial talks and some kind of back and forth regarding the election of the president of the European Commission. So we know that Ursula von der Leyen, whom you know as the incumbent, she is running for re-election, and it is also not so sure. Her majority was already slim last term, and it has gotten even slimmer this time. So she's heavily negotiating and also courting the conservative right, such as Giorgia Meloni, the prime minister of Italy, to gather her majority to get re-elected. Why is her re-election important and for Ukraine and the outcome of the eventual kind of formation of the groupings in the European Parliament? Well, it is quite essential for both military, financial support. That the president of the European Commission that has been quite vocal in support of Ukraine, such as von der Leyen has been, gets the confirmation and gets re-elected again. And yeah, so let me perhaps talk about the news first of all from the EU from today. That the EU countries actually have approved the first tranche of almost 1.5 billion in military aid for Ukraine, which is going to be a direct purchases of kit and ammunition and aerial defense systems. And these direct purchases that have been approved, they are supposed to be financed by proceeds of frozen Russian assets, which is, of course, also a symbolic move that this Russian money is going to be actually used by the European Union to support Ukraine. Hungary, that is Hungary's Orban and his regime, have been blocking this payment and other payments, for example, under other funds for weapons to be purchased for Ukraine by the European Union. This development from today is very positive in many ways, both material and symbolic. But it has been also quite evident that forces such as Orban or players on the European political scene, it seems like this particular block that he was trying to put on was not effective. Otherwise, European Union is really funding quite a lot of military support. Has been funding quite a lot of military support for Ukraine over the years. Just a second. As part of the support of, for example, 6 billion euros has been approved. This payment of almost 7 billion euros has been 6 billion euros has been approved under the European peace facility to provide military support to the armed forces of Ukraine. And this European peace facility, its budget is being negotiated right now. It is a very special fund in the pocket of money, a kind of a European war chest. And the EU member states, they pay their contributions directly every year based on the estimated annual budget, and this is being renegotiated right now. So a lot of interesting and very momentous things regarding, for example, military support for Ukraine has been happening in the last weeks. And one perhaps comment before I stop is to comment on the political forces that have actually emerged after the European election. So there was quite a lot of discussion during the campaign that the extreme right and the conservatives would gain majority in the European Parliament. This has not happened, although the majority of the, let's call them liberal to progressive forces, that is EPP, SD, and Renew Europe, have a majority again, but this majority is slimmer. It fell down from 60 to 55%. And this speaks most of all, as far as Ukraine is concerned, about possible fewer chances to increase support or to speed up Ukraine's accession into the EU. So we were, at worst, since the extreme right has gained relatively more support in comparison to last term, we can expect some initiatives from them endangering existing support. But of course, it is quite positive that this majority of the liberal progressives that have been solid in support for Ukraine still have maintained the majority, even though it has actually fallen down quite a bit due to the losses that the Greens and the Liberals have taken, particularly in Germany and in other countries. I guess I'm over my 10 minutes, so I can tell you more about the details perhaps later. Thank you.
Thank you, Zofia. Thank you so much. Let's move on to Vadim. That's okay.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you everyone, and I'm very glad to be here, especially with such a situation in France. And I think we can speak it later about parliamentary election, who will be have an impact, I think, on Ukraine. But I think I will conclude on that, and we can ask some question about that. But first of all. About the European election, does it mark a decline or in support of Ukraine? I think there are more signs of readiness, but several polls before the election shows that still a real support among European opinion. Several was published in Guardian, in our newspaper, on each newspaper in Europe, and I think they reflect a desire for Ukraine to win. That's I think the sensibility of European citizen to win, or the Russia not to win. I think it's both, but its overreach form of support is imply that there is the most dissensions. First of all, the military aids or Ukraine's entry in the European Union appears to be one of the biggest debates in Europe and in France, for example, for that be such a debate by the far right. Also, several formations from the far right to the left are questioning today the consequences of such membership for social, agricultural, and security issues. For example, with recent enlargements of European Union have led to resentment of social and economic dumping. It was a very huge debate, like for the last 10 years in France, for example. The far right issue, this is a driving force. While it once talk of a French exit, for example, after the Brexit, it now wants to work with other groups to reform the European Unions. So we have questions like immigration, agricultural, but it's still on the theme of the far right. But some of far right in European unions are presenting Ukraine like an agricultural superpower, that will absorb most of the sector's aid. It will also benefit from the majority of the cohesion funds. So it's a huge, I think, debate will come in next week to the European Parliament. So it will create considerable controversy and opposition from the countries about this entry of Ukraine into Europe. Tomorrow it will be the first round of the negotiation with Moldavia, so we will have details about that. But for the other theme like security and strategic partnership, it once again the purpose, I think, and less of the bilateral arguments are the subject of the debates, particularly in France. As far as security and strategic partnership are concerned, sorry, it was also said, in a difficult economic and social context for France and the majority of the population, the sums which allocated to Kiev are beginning to be criticized. It's a huge importance there in the country. This is because they are being set against the backdrop of budget cuts. For the last year, we have I don't know 10,000 billions of euros who has been cut for the 1 year, and now we speak about 20 billions of euros will be budget cuts in France. So faced with these situations, the inflations, low wages, public services with a lack of resources, and about less investments, many French people are calling for these sums to be allocated not for Ukraine but to other things. And I think this peak will be in the next election in 4 days now in France, and especially on the far right presentation for the far right program. So so I think the same applies to the investment finance for Ukraine and development aid for whose benefits will be to the Ukrainians, because I think also the debate is about the depth of the Ukrainian will be increased too, because French president have decided to help Ukrainian by funds, but so you can have to pay these funds, and it was during the European campaign, but no one particularly shows these announcements, and I think we have to see what especially the French president want to do, because he's presenting like an ally of Kiev. That's true for weapons like that, but for economics and social investment, I think we will have to wait and to see what they wanted to do, and especially because he seems to have a big project for Ukraine in Europe. So I think the next European mandate will be interesting about that too. But I think for European citizens, and maybe for European citizens, the best answer is how you guarantee a great guarantee to Ukraine. Because it's one of the perspectives for the end of war or for the next step, security, economic and social, and what are Europe long-term objective. It's the Ukraine to be a part of Europe. It's the Ukraine have security against Russia. It's all the debates who is now not been very developed during the European campaign and also in the French Parliament election. So I think it's one of the main problem in our country. We just don't have just to send our arm, for example, for the French president. The speaking. The last speech was counterproductive announcements about just sending troops in Ukraine. For the French people, it was like a huge step, a too huge step for each citizen in France, and so that participate to the far right good result in European Parliament, but I think also in legislative election. So in the two main election, the Ukraine was in the debate, but not for a good objecting, I think, because we didn't speak about Ukraine citizens, what they afraid, what they want, what the liberty cost, and everything. But solidarity does not prevent us from understanding what our goals are. I think peace in exchange for currency of the Ukraine is a huge discussion that the next mandate of the European deputy have to take, not only back to them and to demonstrate first firmness to Russia. And I think that's all for the first speeches. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Vadim. Just a quick reminder, any questions you have, there is a chat on the bottom of the screen called Q&A. So please start typing in your questions, and we will read them out loud and answer after the last speaker. And now we move on to Tanya Vyhovsky.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. Thinking of the framework of the United States, we have made it through our primary elections and are looking at elections in November, and it is a rematchup between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump, which for the country, for Ukraine, really, I think if former President Trump takes office again, it's pretty catastrophic. We certainly know that, the United States' role in a lot of this is really financial military aid. And even under the current president, that has been difficult to get through because we have a divided Congress. We have a slim majority in the Senate, and we do not have the majority in the House. And so it's been a lot of infighting and really difficult to get anything forward under this current president. And what we know from the previous president's time in office is he, quite famously tried to extort the president of Ukraine for his own personal gain. So I certainly don't think there's anything good to come from the United States if President Trump is reelected. And unfortunately, I don't think that is out of the realm of possibility. We are a deeply divided nation at this point in time with huge economic stressors, and the current president, I don't think, has done enough to really invest in the people to really calm those concerns that what we're doing isn't working. And so I'm unsure. When I look at, the polls every month, the two candidates are neck and neck. On, one week it's former President Trump 51%, President Biden 49%. The next week it's President Biden 52%. But that's really where it's sitting. Like, we really just don't know, which I think points to how deeply divided the country is. And, we're grappling with a lot of the same things that I'm hearing everyone else talk about, low wages, economic insecurity. Add to it that we have a for-profit healthcare system that bankrupts people. It's actually the single largest driver of bankruptcy in this country. And so we are struggling. And even now, like I said, our populace is really divided if they're even paying attention to what's happening in Ukraine. I think with the rapid media cycle and how much the vast majority of people are struggling in their own lives, they're not paying attention to what's happening internationally. And so many of the arguments about how we engage in international affairs happen only with the politicos, and the regular people really aren't involved or engaged at all. A lot of people I speak to have no real idea that there's still a war happening in Ukraine, and the attention has shifted a lot to what's happening in Gaza, which is also horrific. And what is happening at the federal level in terms of aid is those things are getting linked together. So aid for Ukraine is being linked with aid for Israel, which creates even more divides. And that has created additional problems. We barely got through an aid package about a month ago. And so many compromises were made in that I think nobody was actually happy with how that moved forward. Whereas you counter that to early on when the United States had a huge outpouring of support for Ukraine and really was at the state level and at the federal level, many people were pushing for aid. That has shifted pretty dramatically. And I think with a re-election of President Trump, I'm not just concerned about the impacts for Ukraine. I'm frankly concerned for the impacts of global democracy if that happens. So it's deeply concerning what's going on here. I wish I could come to the table with a little bit more hope about what was happening in the United States, but that's not really where we're at. And I don't have a clear view of which direction it ends up going. And I think that in addition to, the corruption and the alignment with Russia that we've seen from Donald Trump, it will create so much chaos in the United States that I don't know how much functional foreign engagement there will be because of the amount of chaos that I think that will create here. I think people are scared here that they will continue to lose hard-won rights. We know that under the Supreme Court that President Trump took control over, we lost the federally protected right to reproductive health care. And I think people are also really concerned that will continue. And so I think a lot of the focus may become more insular than the United States already is. And that in it, adds additional concern. In terms of advocacy work, our labor unions are very, very divided in terms of what they support, what they don't support. And historically, we have an incredibly low percentage of our workers that are actually engaged in labor unions. And that has been higher, but I think it was in 2016 was at a historic low at about 9% of workers were unionized. I think we're up to about 11%, but there's been such rapid work in trying to rebuild unions internally that a lot of them aren't focused on external work. They're just focused on organizing workers and protecting the little bit of gain that they have gathered in terms of workplace democracy That said, even in Vermont, where we have, I think, 4 major unions, they're split. There's a real split as to whether or not they think we should be supporting anybody overseas or whether or not we should be letting any money go to military. And so it's really challenging to even organize the people you would think would be obviously supportive of this. It's created a real split sometimes just in the work that I'm doing connected with the Democratic Socialists of America, because they too are split if we should be spending any military aid to anyone. And so I think that's really what I bring to the table is, yes, the movement towards the far right in the United States is really, really detrimental and damaging to any work we could be doing in solidarity with the Ukrainian people, in solidarity with, Ukrainian labor. And we're already in a pretty precarious spot due to the deep division within the United States, even in places where you would absolutely expect to have support. So I think that's what I have to say at the moment, but I'm certainly happy to answer questions as they come in.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tanya. I wanted to ask Natalie, would you like to take over the questions section?
Yeah, sure. I can read this one that's come in. So it's got a note: in Germany, along with the AfD, who are pro-Russian, the new BSW party also did well and is opposed to the war in Ukraine. This suggests that Germany, which is one of the main supporters of Ukraine in Europe, is really undermined, with Schulz's government weak and support for the SPD low. Where does this leave the pro-Ukrainian German left when Die Linke are now in existential crisis? And doesn't this blow a huge hole in support for Ukraine in Europe, especially with the potential for US withdrawal of support after November? So I don't know who's best to answer that first, but I was going to guess Zofia. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is a huge problem, and I am, but I wouldn't also, just to calm down, I wouldn't overstate the influence of particularly Sarah Wagenknecht on the European level. Of course, the situation in Germany with the political scene having been so overhauled in the last months, I am myself a little bit shocked that this is actually possible in Germany, to see such a big shift in political forces, party splitting and so on. So this is really new. And it has also been clear that a lot of that upheaval was actually caused by the issues that the other speakers mentioned, using the cost of living crisis, using energy prices, using anti-immigrant sentiment to basically, kind of split the German society. So you definitely see, and to radicalize, certain elements. So you definitely see that. But now, in terms of the new configuration of the European Parliament, what is really important to mention, and this is really complicated, what was really important to mention is that AfD was Alternative für Deutschland, right? The far right German party, which is pro-Russian, was basically excluded from one of the European parliamentary fractions. European Parliament fraction has a lot of power, a lot of prerogatives. To belong to one and to be able to form one out of 20-something MEPs, members of European Parliament, is something that is powerful. And if you are non-aligned, so-called non-associated party, like now AfD is, you lose quite a lot of influence. So that is positive in the sense that they have been ostracized in a way, even from a parliamentary faction which is already quite right, quite far right. So this makes it a little bit more difficult for AfD to influence some policy that is anti-Ukrainian. Of course, Sarah Wagenknecht is a very interesting phenomenon. This is a former leader of the Left Party in Germany, and she has had in her life and her career, she's been a staunch pro-Russian politician. Just last week, she basically said point blank that the West should accept and consider whatever proposals Vladimir Putin put out last week. You know, these maximalist kind of offers, non-offers to Ukraine regarding a future peace treaty or ceasefire or whatever. So she is definitely using that anti-immigrant pro-Russian sentiment that is still present in Germany. And this is the interesting situation on the European Parliament level, because there is speculation and people are wondering, you know, pundits and everyone, whether Zara Wagenknecht and her kind of nationalist left that she represents, how far will there be a tacit or formal cooperation between her MEPs and people such as, for example, Orban's MEPs, that is Hungarian MEPs from Fidesz, or MEPs from the Slovak Smer, which is also has a kind of a similar nationalists kind of pseudo-left profile. All of these parties and several others like the Estonian KOS and Bulgarians and so on, they all have one thing in common, is that the thing that they have in common is that they are not very in favor of supporting Ukraine in that way or another, either military or economic or both, right? So here, what is really important, and this is my last sentence to this reply, is to support the left forces in the European Parliament, such as, for example, the Nordic parties, Finnish, Danish, Swedish, and to look for support with them, because these are the type of parties that understand, and this is going back to what Tanya said a little bit. These are the parties that understand the importance of upholding international law and human rights. And these are the parties that support both, for example, the sovereignty of Ukraine and Palestine. And this is the way to go. And I'm also happy that in France we also have now a left coalition which has managed to agree upon these two issues as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Zofia. I think Marianne was the next one to raise the hand.
I have a new question from Sasha. So if there's someone that wants to continue answering this question.
Vadim, would you like to answer this question too?
Yeah, just to complete Zofia speaking, which was a very good analysis, I think, because in the European Parliament it will be, I think, difficult to change the policy about Ukraine, especially with just AfD and Zara Wagenknecht. But I think, yeah, the left have to be more I don't know, more in power to insist about Ukraine's sovereignty, and to speak also about social situation in each country, because I think there's a good result for AfD or Zara Wagenknecht. It's not Ukraine. It's about immigration, about social situations, about wages, but not about the policy. I think about the policy of Ukraine. It's one of the detail, but not the main consequence of these thoughts. We have the same in France with national unions for the far right. Which is not their speech is about Ukraine, who have an impact in the European election, but especially about I don't know, immigration, about crisis of the agricultural citizens, because we have a huge demonstration before the European election in each country, in Spain, France, Belgium. Germany, I think it was a huge movement, but it was not a consequence of Ukraine, but of consequence of policy, of European policy about, I think, agricultural movement. So I think it's not just about Ukraine, but about the main stages. And it's interesting in France too, because we have the same debates about the policy of Macron. And this solidarity about Ukraine, it was used by the far right in France because they say that the impact of economic solidarity have an impact about the poverty in France. So that was a kind of discussion and argument, so is very difficult to oppose. But if I think the left have the opportunity to speak about Ukraine sovereignty and the condition of social, it will be the good answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Vadim. Marianne, you have another question.
Question from Sasha. So it says, question from Tanya. U.S. radical left seems not great on Ukraine. For example, DSA majority is apologists for Russia. Even pro-Ukraine left groups seem inert on the question. Left Congress people also seem weak. Could you say more about this?
Yes, absolutely. So certainly, I think I spoke a little bit to this as at the end of when I was speaking, is how deeply divided even who should be our allies are. You're absolutely right. I have been frustrated with the lack of unity on this issue. And when I speak to people, a lot of times where the left, and I don't know that we really even have radical left in the United States, we're so right as a whole, but what is considered radical left here, I think, would be centrist almost anywhere else. But to that point, a lot of them, their argument for why they are not supportive or why they are not strong in this issue is that they are generally anti-war. And it can be difficult at times to break through that. I've certainly gotten into some personal, arguments with people who generally have been very supportive of my work, who are so dug in on we shouldn't be giving money to anything military anywhere ever at all, without recognizing that things are much more nuanced and the global impact on that type of response. So I think that is where some of that is coming from. And again, I think that with this stretching on as long as it has, a lot of people have moved on to the next thing, the next war, the next place. And frankly, one of the challenges I think that we have in the United States, and particularly why, there is so much focus right now on what is happening to the Palestinian people, is that the US has a lot more to gain by supporting Israel militarily than they do to gain by supporting Ukraine. And I think that is where we're finding some of this infighting, because our centrist left is like, no, we have to focus on this other thing, and we have to really break down any opposition to that, because that's really our foothold into the oil-rich regions in the Middle East. So, it's really complicated beyond just, I think, people's individual ideas or even organizational individual ideas. And so I think that that's where some of that breakdown is coming from. Earlier in this, in the war in Ukraine, the left was much more united in support, and then has fractured away in this, like, actually, war is always bad. And so we just can't support that. And I think it's just too purist. I think that that's sometimes what I struggle with the left, is that they can be very ideologically pure and unwilling to look at the nuance of how these things actually play out on the ground with real people in real economies. And that is really tough to organize around that.
Thank you, Tanya. Natalie?
Hey, thanks. I'll read two questions, one for the US and one for Germany, because I know we have a couple of whole panel questions on the list here. So the first one is, in my advocacy work, I found that the argument that 72% of the 61 billion the US allocated for Ukraine will be spent in the US to be very powerful. On the flip side, Republican J.D. Vance has argued that justifying war as a jobs program is grotesque. Is there a way of threading that needle and saying Ukraine support is actually good for the bottom line of the American working class? And then the one from, so that's from Julian, the one from John is, what has caused the weakness of the Schultz government?
Sorry, what was it? Was it to Tanya? Was it a question to Tanya?
Sorry, I was just going to say, Tanya probably could take the first one, and then Zofia and Vadim for the second one on Schultz.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So it's really interesting. And I think one of the biggest problems actually is the strength of the propaganda in the United States. So while you're hearing, you know, some of this conversation about how that money would be spent here, the nationalism and the immigration, very like put the United States first propaganda is that any money being spent on anyone else is money that isn't in the pockets of people that are struggling. And it's obviously wrong. We know that. We know that the US defense budget is $841 billion. It's the largest chunk of our spending, and that could easily be spent, carved out and spent on supporting global democracy. But both the center left and the far right alike have really engaged in strong austerity budgeting. And so they have no problem spending $841 billion on, the largest by far Department of Defense in the world. But when it comes to raising minimum wages past, $15,000 a year, they refuse. We don't have the money for that. When it comes to stuff like universal health care, we don't have the money for that. And so what's happening, I don't know that argument would make a difference, I think, is really the problem, because those things have been pitted so firmly against each other. Us spending money to help people in Ukraine means that it's going to continue to be hard for you to put food on your table. And I think we could point back to history, World War II being one of the biggest economic drivers, and really what we saw economically coming out of World War II. And it is a tricky needle to thread, because we don't want to be like, oh, we should have a big war and then everybody will be okay. And that's certainly not what I am suggesting. But what I have found is, due to a lack of strong civics education and how much people are struggling, the sort of political talking heads are able to say whatever they want and message however they want. So I really don't know that would even land with people. I certainly know that when I'm talking to people who are, working class and even poor people who tend to be far right voters, they're so dug in. And what I know, when I'm not in the Senate, I'm a social worker, so I have a fair amount of human psychology experience, is that when someone's that dug in and they're really hurting, you don't connect with them with statistics. You connect with them on feelings. And what they're feeling right now is angry that anyone would be getting US aid when they can't put food on the table. And so I don't know that it would even land. And we know that would create, and always has, every time we have, it had military engagement, it creates jobs. And a lot of the argument that I try to make is that $841 billion, this little bit that is going to aid Ukraine and really help maintain democracy in Europe, and frankly, I think the world, because to one of the questions I saw in the chat, I don't think Russia stops at Ukraine. I think, when I was in Romania last year and watching the news there, what I kept feeling is, oh my goodness, has Russia started World War III? And so I think this does have impacts for the globe. And that is a lot of what I try to connect with people on, but it's so hard for them to see it when they're struggling so much. And the Republicans and the far right will use whatever they can, regardless of how hypocritical it is, to argue what they want to argue. They have put forward plenty of grotesque and just horrific ideas, but when it doesn't go with what they want or their narrative, they're perfectly happy to name oh, well, that's grotesque. And so it's tough to argue that type of propaganda and unhinged, unmoored ideology with any type of logic.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tanya. Shall we move to questions to the whole panel then? Yeah. Marianne?
I think there was still a question about Schultz.
Yeah,
Natalie?
I can answer that quickly. I belong to a Polish party, but of course the relationships between Poland and Germany are undeniable due to geography and history, and I am very interested in the fate of the German left, because it's important for Polish and European and Ukrainian future, of course. Right. So Scholz is said to be a weak leader in general. This has been quite a popular assessment of him, that he has turned out to be a bad communicator, not a very good person to lead Germany, a very important country in Europe in the times of crisis, such as the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But I think it's not only his personal qualities, but or the lack of personal qualities that are regarded for such a prominent role at the moment. But perhaps the weakness of his coalition is also contributing to the fact that Scholz is weak to this statement, right? Which I think is true. Because his very, very colorful Jamaica, as they say, Jamaica coalition of liberals, Greens, and Social Democrats, has been struggling as well. The Greens have not been able to push forward with their very bold agenda, that green and transformation agenda that a lot of Germans really voted several years ago for that agenda, and they were convinced that this is the right way to go for Germany. But the Greens being hampered all the time by budgetary breaks by the liberals that they sit with in the coalition, were not able to basically realize this agenda. There has been other difficulties. So when you think about the Russian invasion and how it particularly in the first year, how it was being said that Germany is going to basically sit in the dark and cold because Russia is going to cut off all energy. Actually the Green-led ministries that were responsible for handling the situation, they handled the situation really well. No German was sitting in cold or dark. But this has not kind of brought any gains in terms of popularity for this coalition. And so now we are in such a situation that it is likely, first of all, the situation is, as I mentioned before, that the whole German political scene has been revamped and reformed, and we have not only a split on the left, but also right-wing and conservative forces are gaining. So it is very likely that soon we are going to have again a rather conservative chancellor, probably Friedrich Merz of the CDU. But the last sentence to this: why is Scholz weak? Well, because the German left is weak. This is actually something that we should remember very well and consider very strongly. The German left is fractured. It is in an existential crisis, as one of the participants in the chat said, and there is no pushback, not real pushback, because Zara Wagenknecht, who is this nationalist leftist, she is basically writing herself into the right-wing pro-Russian discourse and amplifying this in Germany. So what we should do is to support, pro-Ukrainian, true leftists in Germany, in order, if we want the situation to reverse and to have a better situation in Germany that would support Ukraine, of course. Thank you.
Okay, should we move on to another question?
Sure. Do you want me to read one of the whole panel ones out here?
Yes, I think, yeah, maybe
Okay.
one by one. Yeah.
Is Russia viewed as a threat not only to Ukraine but to EU itself? Is there any conversation about Russia's military ambitions beyond Ukraine? So whoever wants to start with that one, I suppose.
Well, obviously,
Zofia?
obviously, Central Eastern European countries and Baltic countries have been, spending a lot on weapons and armies. So in Poland, at least, we are definitely the current liberal, also a very colorful coalition with similar problems to the one in Germany, is spending quite a lot right now on this. And there is a active aggression on our eastern border, which is part of a hybrid war that Russia is waging against Poland. It is a very complicated situation in which Razem is, of course, one of the few voices and strong voices in Poland, which says yes, it is a hybrid war, that Putin and Lukashenko are pushing, kind of recruiting Afghanis and Africans, bringing them to Moscow, training them, and then basically bringing them to the Polish, that is the European Union border, and basically encourage them or even pay them to storm the border. But the other side of the coin is that Polish governments, both the conservative one of PiS as well as the current one, which is a liberal government, they are reacting to it in a completely scandalous manner. They are using pushbacks. They do not respect human rights and international law. So and this is of course fracturing. Like why is Putin and Lukashenko doing this? This is another out of a long list of tricks that they are using in order to split societies in Europe and to exert negative pressure on us. We also know that there have been some actors present during those agricultural protests that were mentioned, but of course let's say the worries and the grievances of the Polish farmers regarding the situation in Europe and potential accession of Ukraine is a serious matter that should be discussed. But coming back to whether countries in Europe are worried that there is some aggression likely, well, we have active aggression, and we think indeed, if, for example, the military front in Ukraine collapses, then that will be also a huge threat, a security threat to Eastern Europe at least, and the whole of Europe. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Zofia. Does anyone else want to comment on that?
I mean, I don't,
Vadim?
obviously I can't speak to what's happening in, well, I mean, I am aware of what's happening in Europe, and I certainly can't speak to everything that's happening within, closed door conversations in the United States. But again, as I have viewed this from the beginning, this is not just a threat to Ukraine. It's not just a threat to Europe. It's really a threat to whether or not we are united as a globalized world in democracy. And that is a conversation that I know I'm having with some people, but I don't think it's happening, at least in the United States, in the places that it needs to be happening, because I think this is bigger, really, than Ukraine, than Eastern Europe, than Europe. I really think this could become a worldwide threat to democracy. So it's certainly a conversation that I'm having. I know last year I was in person with a bunch of people, from across Europe, people from Poland and Spain. And that was really the conversation that, what I was being asked is like, are people making the connection between the Russians and China? And are people making the connection between, and the answer in the United States in large part is no, they're not. But I think that they're really important conversations to be having as we build support to make sure that the military front in Ukraine does not collapse. And I also, I'm sitting regularly with, the nuclear option makes that really, really worldwide as well, thinking about, all of the threats to melt down power plants that would run right into the Black Sea and would create, a nuclear wasteland for most of Eastern Europe. So I really think that it is absolutely a threat to Europe, and absolutely really actually a global threat.
Thank you. Vadim, would you like to say something?
Yeah. About this threat, I think we didn't discuss about also the name in French. The Baltic Sea is one of the area very interesting, not very dangerous, because now with Sweden, Finland, who is now in the NATO, the Russian move, because I've seen when I was in Russia, but they move troops also near the Baltic Sea. So now we have several countries around the area who have a lot of troops, and it's very very just interesting, but in it's very annoying because now we will try to make discussion in Iran country. There was 2-3 years ago between Sweden, Finland, Russia, and and Lithuania, Estonia. But now I think the negotiation is stopped, and I've seen several peace movements in Russia, and they are very worried, sorry, about that, because it's a lot of country with nuclear powers, not nuclear arms, but with nuclear electricity like that. And is a bomb or just someone who decide to drop, I don't know, something on it, it will be catastrophic, not for just Russia of the Baltic Sea, but each one in Europe. So that's one of the maybe of the fronts with not yet interesting from our government, but is still very upset from this area of the world, of the European countries. And also about the threat of communication for the French parliamentary election. We know that the Russian will have an impact. They have also an impact during the Gaza protest, and they do some campaign about that. Several people was arrested in France from that propaganda. So yes, we know that they are trying. They not succeed yet, but we know that they made several influence between the Iranians, the far right in France, and the party of Putin. They are speaking during some conference in the Eastern Europe before the war. We know that they have link between them. They have some of money was been directly given like several years ago to this movement. So we know they are supporting them, but now it's difficult for them. They well, never say that, but I think we as a newspaper we are searching like evidence of that influence. I think that's all for me.
Thank you, Vadim.
Hi, I'm gonna, if we're ready for a new question, I was gonna combine one from the Q&A with a question that I had. So the question to the whole panel is, if Trump wins, can Europe make up the difference in terms of aid to Ukraine to maintain the struggle? One thing I was wondering about, to build on that, was with Zofia mentioning the 6 billion euros that have come from the European Peace Facility maybe? The war chest of the EU. I'm just wondering how much is in that war chest and how that compares to the general EU budget, because to all of us, a billion sounds like a lot of money, but I don't know how that compares to what's in the budget and what's in the war chest. And then building on that question.
It is a war chest that is separate from the EU budget. So the member states are paying directly in there, and there is a budget, let's say, framework that is being negotiated every year. I think, I will check on Google, but I think this year it was about 12 billion euros. So half of it basically went to support Ukraine militarily. Yeah, and that is next to this is another, just one source of aid, right? So this is not the only source where the euros come from. So there are several, right? So yeah, so that's basically it. But to answer the question whether we will be able to cover, if Trump says, okay, we stop any funding of Ukraine, like he had declared several times. No, my guess would be, the US aid is so massive that I don't think Europe can mount this type of funding. I have no. I think my advice here would be to keep up doing what we had been doing intensely. For example, in the first year of the invasion, the internationalist left talk to each other, try to mount campaigns together, also transatlantically. talk even more often together if we realize that it is, or if Trump comes back to power, then such conversations will be and common action will be really important, and perhaps then we can do something.
Thank you so much, Zofia. Does anyone else want to comment on this? Vadim?
Yeah, I think like Zofia, if United States doesn't finance the help, security help for Ukraine, the European Union will not have the same sum of dollars and euros like the US does. So yeah, I think we hope they will be continue, or they will have to have a negotiation during the, I don't know, next mandate of European deputies, to see how we can help Ukraine, not just with arms, but with economic solidarities. I don't know, like for example, Ukraine to be a partner of European unions, like member, not partners, but maybe member, like or security guarantees from Europe to Ukraine. I think if the U.S. solidarity stops, that's one of the main possibility, but not the same maintenance of money, because in arms, I think the European Union is very difficult to produce munitions, to produce I don't know, planes and everything. So it will be like for many years to have the same influence for Ukraine's. For Ukraine's military front, so I think it's not possible for the European Union. Sorry.
Thank you, Natalie.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, the next question was more about, I guess that one was about the US as well, is looking at the alternative sources of solidarity from the US if Trump wins. But kind of related to that is how Congress elections are going. If that looks like it's going to go towards supporting Ukraine or not, if there's any indication.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can, do my best to speak to that. And I feel like I keep circling back to this. The solidarity and the unity in the United States is so fractured. And so I don't know necessarily what would be, other methods of solidarity. I do know, one of the things that we've done in Vermont, such a tiny state, we're the second smallest state in the country. So, I mean, it's not a whole lot coming out of here, but, the Ukrainian diaspora in Vermont has connected to do some solidarity work. And I know there's a huge group of Ukrainians in Texas doing solidarity work. And they're up at the Texas State House I think every Tuesday, talking to their electeds and protesting if they need to protest. So I think that would be one mechanism potentially of building some nationwide solidarity, would be really connecting with the Ukrainian diaspora that's here. In a more unified way. I mean, that's the other, I think, real challenge in the United States. It is just such a massive country. And there really are such regionally very different political alignments and educational systems. And so, the sort of state rights, like every state does things completely differently. We have our own state government. And so it's kind of tough, actually, to unite across the nation. And I think that's part of why we are where we are in terms of how fractured we are. But I do think that might be one mechanism, is trying to really figure out where are these Ukrainian solidarity groups across the country that we could unite together to help, one, put pressure on electeds, but also just raise money, just, send our own money if that's what need be. And obviously that's never going to amount to what the US government can send. But that's one thing that comes to mind as something that would be better than nothing. In terms of the congressional races, I mean, there's all 485 Congress members up for re-election, so I can't follow them all. I'm also running for re-election in a primary, and so that's sort of where some of my attention is as well. And so I don't really know. I think we're just like the presidency, we're really, it's a little up in air. And I certainly know there are certain races that are really being targeted, but most of that targeting is around Israel and Gaza, and Ukraine's not even a topic of conversation. So I think that's another thing that we could be working to do more of is really trying to ask, you know, and I'll certainly reach out to my counterparts in Texas, but to be asking the people that are running to represent us where they stand on the issue and trying to lift that up as an issue, because it really isn't even being talked about. So it's tough to know where people stand on it. And it certainly hasn't broken down neatly on party lines. As one might, you know, as was pointed out to earlier, the left isn't as good on this as they should be. And so it is, you know, someone may be running as a Democrat or a progressive Democrat, and they might not land where we would hope that they would on this issue. So it's tough to navigate that. And again, I think some of that is just how incredibly enormous the country is and how difficult it is to actually gauge. I was earlier in the year, when the Ukrainian aid package was coming up for vote, I was doing a little bit of strategy work with some folks on the ground in Ukraine to sort of target congressional members here and try to figure out where the current Congress sat on that, although that's not information that I have the liberty to share. But you know, that's certainly, I also think work that we can be building is, you know, how can I and others here help support the work there and just those communications access pieces, because I mean, that wasn't a lot. I mean, it was work for me, but it was certainly easier for me to figure out, like, okay, I know this person's good on this, and I know someone who knows this Congress member, and I know someone in that state, to just be able to help make so people can make those more personal appeals. So I do think there's some real, you know, cross globe organizing that we can do as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Natalie.
Sorry, can I ask a question about the French parliamentary elections? Because I'm just wondering how they're going and also trying to understand why that gamble was made. So if you can enlighten us on either of those 2 points, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. It's very difficult to we know that the two main movements still in the head. It's far right, I think, but it's a global poll, so we don't know, because they have particularity in this election, which is very local. So it would be very interesting at the end of the first term in this Saturday, because we'll see how the impact of the far right, and also if the coalition between all the left parties have a chance to have the majority. It's very depressing, because now the last two polls seems far right in the head of the for the nation. But it's interesting because in the program of the coalition, the left coalition, they maintain two interests about Ukraine and Gaza. It was one of the first articles they say. It was about during the press conference last week. The coordinator of the French France Insoumise, Manuel Bompard, assumes that there are two possibilities of these new coalitions. It will be a purchasing power and establishment of the voice of peace for France on the international stage. So now we will see how they prepare this proposition, but it's by diplomacy, recognition of freedom of ecocide, like in Ukraine. Also maybe the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So they have several parts of the program, who is very interesting, because they want the diplomacy of the French are back, but from for the Ukraine and for Gaza. And for Gaza also, one of huge interest in France, also you can like in United States, is the situation in Gaza, because we have many people who have a lot of Palestinians also in France, and so so the first of of interest is the recognition of the Palestinian country, because there are a lot of pressure here that Macron have to decide to say that. And we think if the left are coming to power, the first act they will do is to this recognition. So that's why it's working together. They say peace in Ukraine, but how may also to conclude to a peace in Ukraine is very difficult, because also Russian and Ukraine doesn't want peace now, because it's very difficult for them. And but also the peace in Gaza is still very, I don't know, not impossible, but not urgent, because Netanyahu doesn't want any peace at all. But it's fractured society as in the United States. I think more and more the Gaza is continuing. So more and more we are discussing about the persecution and what's coming in Gaza and not in Ukraine. So I think the both now are linked in French elections.
Thank you. Marianne.
There's a question in the chat, and this is for the panel. Should the left, particularly in Eastern Europe, support troops from the Baltic states and Poland acting independent of NATO and being in Ukraine if there was a danger of the front collapsing?
So that's a question about an intervention or rules of engagement of Eastern and Baltic armies. Very unlikely to happen. Because, you know, like NATO is one thing, but there is also actually into quite a lot of security defense issues are written into European treaties. Actually, some analysts indicate that the guarantees that the countries that are part of the members of the European Union have given each other guarantees, have written those guarantees into European treaties to defend each other, that these guarantees are actually stronger than Article 5, right, in the famous one of NATO. So actually what I mean to say with this is that I find this very, very, very unlikely, and I don't think this stands in any room as a topic, that there would be some kind of an alliance, a military alliance of, let's say, Lithuanians and Poles, and they would basically go into Ukraine and help of their own accord. I think this is impossible. But perhaps, given that, of course, it is a topic of conversation, both in Poland and on the Polish left, Razem has been quite vocal in asking the question, what will Europe do if Trump comes back to power, and in general America has turned out recently to be less and less reliable, less and less interested in kind of being the policeman of particularly Europe. So we have to do something, and of course there are also other people that have been pointing this out, like Macron with his kind of sovereignty ideas. So we should definitely work on that in terms of kind of becoming a little bit more sovereign as European Union, and work toward accession of Ukraine, and also do not leave anybody behind, and do not build like a fortress Europe that will have its own army and don't care about anybody else, the Middle East and so on. It's not something that we should do, but understand that we live in this complex world. No, so the short answer to this question is I do not think such a thing will happen. But what would the European Union do as a kind of a union of states that also guarantee each other's safety? That's another, and also has military structures such as PESCO. There is quite a lot of cooperation on the European level between the national armies, and there is quite a lot of coordination of Danish, Polish, German, European national armies, with headquarters, for example, of such structures in my hometown in Poland, in Szczecin. So this type of cooperation on a European level exists, and I'm sure that there are defined rules of engagement, and some decisions would then have to be made. So European Union is capable of taking such decisions to engage or not, right, in such a situation, but definitely not member states or in a group or on their own. I don't think so. Yeah.
Thank you. Natalie?
Yeah, I think we have a follow-up to Vadim's talk about French Parliament. There's a question. The new Popular Front includes parties that have long supported Ukraine, the Socialists, the Greens, or the new Anti-Capitalist Party, but also parties such as La France or the French Communist Party, which have had a much worse stance. I'm just going to move to my other screen here on the issue. In your opinion, won't the LFI and PCF change their position again right after the elections?
No, I don't think it's because it was on the main term of the program. They have a discussion like for one day or maybe two before to have these unions, and Ukraine was part of it. That's why the word was chosen very carefully to maintain all the unions because they carefully speak to defeat Vladimir Putin's war of aggression. I quote that, including through armed deliveries, in order to unfailing defend the sovereignty and freedom of the Ukrainian people. So we see, I think the Front Insoumise and the PCF doesn't will go apart after the election. I think now the authority of Ukraine in the left party is it's very common. But the main discussion is about the objective. What now we want to do for Ukraine, so like solidarity. It's to be a part of European Union. It's about armed deliveries. It's about the issue of the war. I think that's the question that have been left for the unions, and especially when if they win in 4 days and for the second term in 10 days, it will be a part of discussion because for the diplomacy, it's a capacity of the president and also of the next government. So it will be a long discussion between the two forces. If is the left for the best, but if is for the far right, it will be like a huge of complication because I think it's more danger for the winning for French citizens, but also for Ukrainian citizens because they seems to have to change the policies, the French policy and the French diplomacy, went for the bad and not the good. So it will be. We will see, and one of the quote of the program is I can talk to all is one of the passage. It's this the delivery of arms is not means that we cannot work effectively to resolve the conflict and restore peace. It is in this area that France's voice is solely lacking at present, despite the fact that several initiatives are currently underway, notably in Brazil, China, and in Switzerland. It was before the peace conference in Switzerland, but that's all the main quotes of the program. So now we have to wait in 10 days what the left union will do on that in the best way.
Thank you, Vadim. Marianne?
A question from the chat. What can we do to support those in Russia who oppose Putin? And how can we support Russian civil society, which is under attack and often being prescribed as undesirable organizations?
Vadim?
That's a very good question. It's very difficult to for the opposition in Russia. I've met several of them, and now like for maybe 1 year, they just for a quote or a citation, they want to just to see the article. They're very upset about that because most of them are in jail or have very very important consequences of their declaration. So it's very difficult for them just to speak. They're continuing, they're trying by signal, by telegram, by everything they can do it for alert the population in Russia to about the war, about the fact of the war, about the impact of the war in Ukraine population, and it's working a little bit, because if you see several polls like for the Levitat Center, you see as a majority of Russian are against war, or not against because they can say that, but there are for peace negotiations. So I think yes, it's how it helps them. That we didn't. I don't know, but just to let them speak, to offer article and voice in our newspaper, in social media. But it's very difficult because the poor now are very watching this closely. For example, now we have to for the last election, I have to wait 3 months to just have a visa for one week, just for 1 week, and that's the same for each French journalist of each media, and I think it was the same for each journalist from United States and from the European countries. So that's very difficult now to speak and to work on Russian society because I don't want that's where we was there. So but we maintain the relationship and the discussion between the people who don't want this war. So yeah, but it's difficult.
Thank you. Does anyone else wants to comment on that?
I will briefly. I think it is really important, and it's an important question that we ask, because I do think it is really critical that we highlight that there are plenty of Russian people putting themselves in great danger to oppose this war, and that those voices do need to be lifted up. And the Russian government doesn't want us to do that, so they're going to make it as difficult as possible. But I think, for me, it's anytime I'm talking about this publicly or anytime I'm talking about this one-on-one, making that clear distinction that the opposition is to what the Russian government is doing. And there are plenty of people in Russia that are being harmed by this war, that are opposed to this war. And so really, I think it is just in as many places as we can that is possible to make that clear distinction and to make sure we're asking these questions and that we're looking for ways to plug in. But it is incredibly challenging because that sort of lies in the opposition of the Russian government's control over what they're doing and their people.
Yes, Marianne?
There's another question in the chat from Christopher. So he says, listening to the dangers, it appears that this year there needs to be a massive increase in weapons supplies. Secondly, I pose the question, if there is no possibility of troops being deployed from the Baltics, is there an argument that existing armies should be able to give release to their soldiers to volunteer?
Okay, Zofia. No, just to the massive increase of weapons for the first question. It's difficult, but I think it's not. It's about population and mobilization in Ukraine. It's a very tough action. Now the young doesn't want to go to. One of the part of the young people doesn't want to go to war. So that's the main problem. Not just weapon, but you have to have soldiers who are going on the front, and that's a very huge danger for them. And I've just speak with author and news and journalist from Ukraine, Artem Shapay. He just finished a book like two or 3 months ago about how he decided to go to the front. And he said now we have two society, one who is defending on the front for the democracy and everything, and one other part who is still at the back, and mainly they doesn't want to go to war. And so, but now there's are for two like party for three years in the front in the next February, and they want to go back to their family, to see their family. So I think the question of the weapon is not good, but not the answer at all for the war. I think it's mainly of the soldiers and how to mobilize each Ukraine I don't know, population, and now it's very difficult for them. They one of the mostly of the people doesn't want to go back or doesn't want to go at all. So I think it's one of the question now.
I think regarding the need of a massive increase of weapons supplies, perhaps will be my answer, because given the new configuration of political powers, slightly changed, and the kind of dynamic situation on the extreme right, and the big changes that are also coming left of SND. The situation in the European Parliament and the uncertainty about the president of the European Commission and all these other factors, I think what we might expect is that short-term obligations might be realized as planned and as expected, but it is the long-term commitments regarding delivery of weapons and all sorts of military support that we should observe and potentially be worried about. And additionally to what Vadim has mentioned, these long-term commitments are also very important for Ukrainian active defense, because they provide a better predictability and efficiency of that defense. So a lot depends on those discrepancies in opinion in the negotiation process that is regarding this new budget of the European Peace Facility. And these discrepancies, they might deepen under the influence of the new parliament, and so it is really important. Of course, also the outcome of the French election, the outcome of the British election, and our support as international left for example, those forces in the European Parliament that might balance out those threats from the far right or from the nationalist left, such as our partners in the Nordics, and all these other left parties that might either come to our side and during crucial votes, support more those long-term commitments to military deliveries for Ukraine and other support.
Thank you. Natalie.
Got another question from the Q&A chat. What could and should European and US pro-solidarity governments and activists be doing to promote solidarity in the developing world to counter Russian overtures in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia?
I mean, I can certainly speak to a couple of things that come to mind. For me, I think one of the things that would be the first thing for the US to do would be to end the blockade to Cuba, so that there is more free line conversation, and one of the only places where Cuba is able to engage is with Russia. So I think that that's one place that the US could and should take an immediate step in changing the way that they're doing things. I think the US has a long history, particularly in Latin America, of destabilizing governments, and we need stop doing that. And I also think we need to think about our immigration policy. I think that when we are forcing people to stay in abject poverty because we won't create a simplified immigration policy, then it of course is going to lead them to accessing help and support from wherever they can, which is a perfect ripe ground for Russia to go in and offer that. And so I think that those are some of the things that immediately come to mind, is to really revamping immigration policy so people are better able to navigate through from, you know, South America to North America, and immediately ending the blockade on Cuba.
Well, I think we should treat.
If I may say something about this, I think the developing countries, because I'm Ukrainian, and like I've left in 2016, and then hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think about solidarity in developing countries. Every time I meet someone from the other places in the world that are suffering from all sorts of invasions and from like bigger empires influence, I think we have a lot in common, and I think it's why this solidarity is not that obvious, because the people in these places are fighting for their own survival. And I think it's up for like the global West to stop dividing us and stop being racist towards refugees from different places, and not to put that differences and like differences of treatment of people, not to put it on the people from the developing countries.
I think there is a lack of really fundamentals of treating, you know, the global South as partners. For example, when we are negotiating true partners, when we are negotiating trade agreements with them, for example, there is a lack of, you know, something simple when you have a look at Gaza and in general the treatment of the collective West of the Middle East. You know, there are basically obvious and glaring double standards, you know, and it seems to be an impossible task for countries such as the US to basically break out of this prison of those double standards. I mean, we definitely need the US to lead the way here. But also the European Union, you know, like trading with authoritarian regimes, even after the lesson that has been learned with Russia, we are still trading, or countries members of the European Union are still buying oil or gas from Saudi Arabia. So not to point the finger solely to at America in general, but we are also guilty of such things. And you know, the slow response of the US, but also several European countries to the atrocities that are being committed in Gaza. You know, this is also showing to people in the global South how much we, like the collective West, don't care about them. And I understand those grievances, and we should definitely, the ball is on our side. And if we want to build solidarity for Ukraine, we should definitely also have you know, pay a lot of attention to that. That's why my heart is with those left parties that understand this and support yeah, this type of, you know, lack of double standards every time, anytime, everywhere in the world, and, you know, respect for international law and for human rights.
Yeah, I think it's, like Zofia says, the double standard is very absenting the other countries. But for the French, for Africa, I think the main interest, it was before the Russia the Russia influence in Africa. It was a very important in the African society, was a post-colonial French power, they was upset about the decisions of the French diplomacy during the last I don't know 40 50 years ago, and because they maintain the power in like in Côte d'Ivoire, in several countries in Africa, was against the people, and when they collapse, the one of the desire of the population there, it was to change the links between France and them, and that was very powerful. And so when Russia comes and with their propaganda, they have a common enemy, like French power, and that's working. And that's working not because of Russia, but because of the situation that power in France and previous presidents have made. Didn't speak about colonials and post-colonial society, but just to maintain power and link and economy links between France and this country. So that's main I think main danger. If the France doesn't see and doesn't analyze that, they will do the same mistake in South Africa, Asia, and that's that. And with a double standard, I think it's a very huge mistake. And one of the previous diplomacy minister, Dominique de Villepin, who was a man in France very famous because he said no to the war in Iraq, I made a huge statement in the news paper Le Monde Diplomatique like months ago, very interesting about how to rebuild the voice of France in diplomacy. Because we stopped to speak which each country, because we decide to be the son of the good, but not to speak with population, with ONG, with unions in those countries. And I think that's a main problem, not about the global south, because the global south seems to have different agenda, but about to speak about population and what they want. And I think that's the main danger when we stop to speak with the population, but just with the power, just with economic links. It's one of the bad facts, and that's what I think the European, some of the European countries doesn't seem the big changing in each country and each continent, like Africa, South America, because they want now to speak equal to equal, and that's not the way we speak now. Thank you.
Thank you, Vadim. Tanya.
Yeah, thank you. I just, Zofia, you, I think, absolutely can point to the finger at the United States. We have sort of led the way in exploitation of the global South. So I certainly am not going to take offense if you do point the finger. And I think you're right. I think we do need to also lead the way and in navigating how we build partnership. I think one of the additional, the current president is certainly not doing a good job with that, but I think one of the additional challenges we would see with a re-election of Donald Trump is actually moving even further in the wrong direction. And that is a threat across the board because, well, I mean, just because of everything we're talking about, I think, yes, we need to really be looking at partnerships, and we need to really be looking at how we, particularly with the climate crisis, we're going to see more and more migration. And we know that, I mean, Hungary is a perfect example of a country that swung incredibly far left or right, not left, because of racist concern about immigration. And we're going to see more and more of that. So I think that we need to be building those partnerships preemptively so that that doesn't create even further swings to the right across the globe.
Thank you. Natalie, Marianne, do we have any more questions, or we can ask if anyone of the panelists have any final notes or very short conclusions that you would like to say?
It sounds good with short conclusions, because I think another question will just open a longer discussion.
Yeah, anyone wants to go first? Vadim, maybe?
Yeah. No, for the conclusion, I think the hope, I say, Zofia, of coalition of left, like in France, it's main importance for solidarity with Ukraine. I think it's how you maintain solidarity with social policy of Europe from international policy, with not like the right do or the far right, but just to speak equal to company, but in the same way to maintain solidarity with Ukraine. And one of the big step it will be to accord, I think, guarantees of security to Ukraine and guarantees of economic independence for Ukraine. And I think the next power have to maintain this. How Ukraine may a good partnership for European unions, how it's important for the population of Ukraine, and to expose what the situation and what they are living with. Because during the last year, we just do speak about politics and not about Ukraine population. And I think it's important to maintain this, how they lived, how they survived, what's the impact of the war for each one, for the children, for the woman, for the man, and how you live with a war constantly during each day for now more than 2 years, and each maybe in the next February for 3 years. So I think if we maintain solidarity, we have to speak about people and how they're suffering, to intend and to explain why they need our support, what they need the in European Union, and what France and other countries have to maintain this solidarity, but maybe in other way to have as an objective like a previous our president on objective like that, I think.
Thank you so much, Vadim. Thank you. Zofia, Tanya, would you like to say something? Like a few final words? Zofia?
Sure. So I think, of course, the material support and the military support is very important. And I think we talked about this at length this time. But I think it's what I believe is very important for the Ukrainian people is that we do not stop talking about their future, do not stop thinking about what a future Ukraine would look like, and stay in dialogue with the Ukrainian people and stay in dialogue with the Ukrainian left, what would be their vision of Ukraine. It is also our duty to think about rebuilding, to think about demining Ukraine, to think about saving the biodiversity and, providing a progressive vision for Ukraine. That this, I talked about this at several meetings of ENSU, and this is a real passion of mine. I think for people to keep fighting, they also have to have something to fight for, in the sense that we should be the ones that provide a concrete vision. I'm not maybe I used the wrong word, dreams. Like we should be the ones that provide a concrete vision, a proposal, worked out with the Ukrainian left. What should the social Ukraine and a green Ukraine be like? And I can tell you that a few months ago, before the European Parliament election, Ukrainian activists that are very well known to you from Socjalny Ruch, we met with our Nordic partners from all over Scandinavia and Finland in Helsinki, with our Hungarian partners from the organization that I have been building up with our partners called Central Eastern European Green Left Alliance. We met in Helsinki and we discussed also with Germans from Die Linke, because it was a Rosa Luxemburg Foundation sponsored event, and we talked about really concretely about new security architectures that we might build up to make Europe safer. What is a left army actually? What is that the kind of the vision of very, very specific things? And we talked about the vision that we might have and build up together of rebuilding Ukraine. I think it was a very, very good also a catalyst of joining forces, uniting again different lefts in Europe. I see a lot of potential in sitting down together, thinking about these things, and also look not to forget about the future. And this is also a way to maintain solidarity with Ukraine and with the Ukrainian left. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tanya.
Yes, thank you. So when I think about this, everything you said so much about looking forward and how do we build back and support Ukraine to envision and help and allow us to help make it materialize what they see for their future, in a green and sustainable way, I think is so critically important. And I think, when I zoom out to the larger picture of global democracy, I think that those connections across the board are really important. It's like when I think about how we save democracy when it's being threatened in so many different places, it's so much about relationships and solidarity, and how are we staying in connection and making sure that we're centering the voices of those who are most being harmed by what's happening right now. And so, Zofia, what you said about just like, those types of meetings, I think are really critically important in really expanding partnerships so that we are in communication. I think one of the biggest things I've seen in the United States and kind of playing out around the world is that breakdown of solidarity, that breakdown of community. And I think we have to really look to build up our global left community in order to create the type of unity and solidarity we need, both to create, peace and a future in Ukraine, but also to create peace and a future in the world that is really much more sustainable and grounded in green equity and movement forward. And so continuing to have these conversations and continuing to think about who our partners are and whose voices aren't at the table, I think is really critically important as we move towards that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of our panelists. I would like to invite Marian Abs to say a few words about Ukraine Solidarity Information Group in Canada. And what you've been doing.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting us to speak briefly today about our group, We're Ukraine Solidarity Information. And we're a newly formed Canadian solidarity group. And our focus is going to be a monthly webinar from a leftist perspective, which will highlight Ukrainian progressive left groups and social movements. The first event that we're working on planning will be about feminism in Ukraine and the situation of women in wartime Ukraine. And we welcome anyone from anywhere in the world to attend. We're just setting up our social media, so you can help us by following and liking our Twitter and Facebook pages and checking out our website. So I'll just put those in the chat briefly, and thanks for letting us speak briefly about the group today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And like a final few minutes, I'd like to invite Christopher Ford to speak about the rescue workers appeal and maybe show us the video. Chris, are you here?
I'm here. Thank you, Maria. Can you hear me? Okay, thanks. The part of our campaign work in the Ukraine Solidarity campaign's been various aid appeals, and we have an ongoing appeal to assist the Independent Mine Workers Union, who've asked us to help their rescue squad in the Donetsk Oblast in East Ukraine. These were previously mine workers who conducted rescue missions in the mines, and now they're operating as regular firefighters to the victims of the constant bombing which has taken place in those areas. Sometimes people think of Donbass simply as a war zone where there's just soldiers, but we should keep in mind that tens of thousands of people live there and work there and are maintaining the energy in many ways also, which is essential. And so these squads are really exhausted. They're desperate for aid. We're gathering together a great deal of equipment they need. It's expensive, so we really need your help. This is our second crowdfunder. It's in the chat. We're aiming to gather another 10,000. We will need to go higher in order to get the equipment they need, and we'll be delivering it in another month or so directly with some other aid we're taking to Ukraine. And we'll be cooperating with the Confederation of Free Trade Unions in our work. So I'm going to show a video appeal from the, if I can get it to work, okay, from the, I beg your pardon, from the squad in Donetsk Oblast.
My з Донеччини, гірничого краю, який сьогодні потерпає від щоденних атак. Сьогодні ми працюємо в умовах війни, рятуємо як працівників вугільних підприємств, так і цивільне населення. Російські війська цілеспрямовано намагаються знищити наші міста, підприємства та енергетику. Крім того, вони застосовують тактику подвійного удару. Вдруге наносять удар, коли рятувальники, пожежники, медики прибувають на місце атаки, щоб рятувати життя людей. Попри все, гірничі рятувальники – це сміливі і мужні люди, продовжують працювати під обстрілами з великим навантаженням. Ми вдячні усім, хто сьогодні підтримує та надає допомогу, зокрема нашим британським колегам. Закликаємо продовжувати допомогу працівникам і всьому населенню України, яке бореться за свободу.
Thank you. Sure. Okay. Thank you for that. Also, I would ask that it's not only to British workers and British trade unions, but if I could ask of our friends in other countries, if you could help us also, if you could raise this appeal where you are, if you could approach firefighters and first responders where you're based, they can help us as well in a big way. And it really, really makes a difference. And I was in communication with the rescue team today. And one of the things they emphasized was the important thing about not being alone and not being isolated, and that your solidarity really, really helps them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you, everyone. And thanks everyone who joined us tonight. And let's all keep in touch. Hopefully it's not our last meeting. And yeah, please follow Ukraine Solidarity Campaign and Vsesvit UK. We run mostly like cultural events in London and do fundraising for the smaller grassroots groups, and the Ukraine Solidarity Information Group in Canada. And you can find the names and surnames of all the panelists in the event description. So thank you. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.